Hi, Seán.
Seán.
I've known you since you were a child, and I've heard your development all the way through the early years, your formative years. And one thing I always know about your playing is you never copied. And there's a great quote by Picasso saying, "Good artists copy, but great artists steal." There's very I'm conscious that a lot of traits of great players evident in your playing that aren't copied, but they're sort of stolen from great players that would make up your style. Tell us about your influences, the influence that you would still think of that might have inspired you to play the way you do.
I've had a huge amount of varied influences. Obviously starting off playing, it was all very piping focused. I suppose the biggest one early on was Seamus Ennis. There was a kind of a turning point for me when I was about 13, 14 maybe, when started really settling in. Like I suppose I got to a standard on the instrument where I was able to kind of go myself and try and express myself. And I got into Ennis's music. Obviously all the technical stuff was there, and he, got wonderful tempo and rhythm and all that, but it was always great fun and a bit of mischief and stuff in his playing that really appealed to me. Nearly flamboyant at times and the stuff he'd be trying, and I always enjoyed that in music, kind of that, I suppose the sense of nearly being on the tightrope and being on the edge, on the cusp of maybe falling off, but never, that's always appealed to me in any of the music I listen to still. I love those players who go for it, and you can tell you nearly feel like you're on edge when you're listening to them, and there's a great excitement in that. So I suppose Ennis at the start for me with piping really was the big kind of open door, and that album, The Return for Fingal, I kind of ate that up and just learned everything on it. And I suppose, like you're saying, it was a case of stealing a lot of the. It's where I kind of developed my technique, or my kind of more advanced technique, like the different crans and the Ennis cran, or the shakes and the different triplets, and even what notes to be cutting on and grace notes. I became more conscious of what he was doing and why he was doing it. And and then it was just kind of, I went through all the phases, like the Tommy Wreck, the Willie Clancy, the Patsy Toohey. Just, as I said, once I got to that level maybe where I was, I was going to yourself for lessons, and and I think I was saying this to you or somebody during the week anyway, I'm not sure how much more you can get contact time with one-on-one classes when you get to a certain level. You have to kind of take it and go on your own journey and figure out where your sound is going to be, because like you said, there's no point in somebody just sitting in front of you and saying this is how you should do it. So I kind of went through that when I was about 14, 15, 16, as I said, Ennis, Clancy, Wreck, Toohey for a long time. In my later teenage years, I kind of hadn't heard any of Patsy Toohey's, and again, it was kind of just wild, very technical playing, so I enjoyed kind of consuming that and trying my best with it. And then I've always had huge interest in other instruments, and particularly the fiddle as well, and Sean Keane, the fiddler, was a huge influence on my playing. He was nearly doing piping technique, and I was redoing the piping technique he was doing as a fiddle player back on the pipes, if you know what I mean. And so again, just eating up his recordings. And again, another player who, like I said, it's like walking on a tightrope, and you feel it's on edge all the time, and great excitement in that. So, and then similarly, I went through Tommy Potts phase and Michael Coleman and all that kind of stuff. And I suppose it was about, what was really interesting as well was that for pipers there was always kind of a fairly obvious shared repertoire, and by kind of stepping out into the world of other instruments, you became aware that actually loads more tunes there that work quite well on the pipes that maybe just hadn't been played by any of the big masters on the instrument, so they'd never really been played at all by anybody. So kind of that was part of the journey as well, was to go and find some tunes that work on the pipes and sometimes don't work on the pipes as well,
Yeah, actually preempted the question I was going to ask about that. I've often heard you saying that you found the sort of, perhaps the attitude of the piping community, which would have been, I suppose, in the 80s, or you're talking about when you were in the 90s, that it was a little restrictive in one sense, in that it sort of, the idea, the notion of a piping tune, as opposed to a tune, and again, to quote another favourite one of Liam's, he says, art begins where technique ends. So you mentioned about that you'd master technique to give yourself the ability to actually assert your own identity as a musician, your own the way you wanted to approach music. But did you find that there was a restrictive notion around piping at the time, or?
Well, I wouldn't say necessarily restrictive. I think it's a little bit like, I find it's a similar thing with, say, like you said, piping tunes and the piping world. It was probably a little bit similar, like the idea of regional styles, which is another conversation altogether. But a lot of the thing to do with regional styles is actually one major player and their repertoire, and that kind of becomes, if you're talking about Johnny Doherty or talking about Michael Coleman or Padraig O'Keefe, their playing is associated with a particular regional style, but really they were just the big player in the area that a lot of other players in the area go and learn their repertoire from, and that type of thing. And it's a little bit similar with the piping world. You had the Ennises and the Leo Elsons and Clancy's, and there was quite a shared repertoire among players, because obviously when they were sharing, they could, didn't have the internet or even, so they were just sharing tunes among each other. So it was a kind of a regurgitated common tunes were being played the whole time, and like you said, they become kind of known as the big piping tunes, which were wonderful. But as I said, kind of just I just tried to branch out and try some of the other tunes, and some of them they work on the pipes, and there's some of them they really don't. There's a reason why they're not piping tunes, because there can be restrictions on the instrument as well, trying other music,
You're playing, as you said, you always try to perform when you're playing. You always try to take it to the edge where you're going to try something, and it might work or it might not work, but you're always going to try it. Your playing is very rhythmical. It's very punctuated, very strong rhythm. It's something that you're very strong on. When you're teaching music, I know, and I've heard you speak about it. You also spoke, which was actually very interesting one time, about how restrictive ornamentation can be when it becomes habit, as opposed to design. Talk to us about that.
Well, it does, and it's something that's fresh in my mind, because it's something I do regularly when I'm teaching classes down here. That again, I think when you get to a certain standard and a certain level, naturally, like, stuff happens that is just muscle memory. Like you cut on particular notes, and maybe you play rolls a certain way, or play triplets a certain way, or whatever it might be. And anything that I've tried to pass on to any students, and something that I try to be aware of the whole time, is that anything that goes into the music is intentionally put in. So if I'm cutting on an A with a D, why am I doing that? Is that accentuating the music? Is that the nicest note to cut with on that other particular note? And if it's not, why am I doing it? You know what I mean? Because like I said, art begins where technique ends. So like, you have to decide why you're doing all those things. And I think it happens when people are learning the music, that they get to a certain level where maybe they can sit down and play with other people and really feel like they've gotten there. But that's only the start of the journey, really. Then and particularly with piping, because it is, predominantly a solo instrument. Like, it's, I think all pipers strive to be able to sit down and play solo and play the full instrument in tune. And I just be always very consciously aware, and even my own music continuously, that when I'm doing things, why am I doing them? Am I intentionally doing them? And actually, sometimes when I'm playing and I hear myself doing something I didn't want to do, it can stick in my craw for the next 20-30 seconds while I'm playing, So it's just I think it's something to always be aware of, rather than you just play a certain way and you do things a certain reason. But I mean, it's really important, I think, in music, to be self-analytical and self-critical and say, why am I doing these things? And maybe I don't want to do them anymore. Maybe I used to like doing that, and maybe I don't. And that's a natural thing. We play music hopefully for a long time, so they should have different cycles in your music and playing different ways, So that would be anybody I've taught down the years. I'd just say, look, just ask yourself why you're doing these things. And sometimes it's a really good exercise to just play the tune completely cleanly on the instrument, and sometimes that can be the most challenging thing,
You're coming down to School Saturday with Clancy most of your life, as a student initially, and with your family, obviously, and as a teacher. How important is the school to traditional music at this point?
Well, it's hugely important, because it gives, traditional music, is predicated on meeting people and talking and sharing and having these discussions and sharing music and there's a buzz and it nearly reminds you why we do the things we do and why it's so important to us, and so just for the reason to actually sit down and meet people and share the music and meet people with the common interest and the common passion that we have, because we want to celebrate it, we want it to thrive, and it's kind of our job now to continue doing that. And then obviously the teaching part of it is very important as well, because it is a tradition you do want to pass on, and you do want to feel like you've contributed in a way and try to help other musicians, older or younger, who are trying to make their way in the world of traditional music and piping, because even today when I was working with some of the lads in the class, they've instruments that might need a bit of a hand with tuning, and there's a few more elements with the pipes that difficult reeds and that type of thing, and they just need to get over those little humps, and then they've got the best opportunity possible to play good music.
From your collaborations with people like Liam O'Connor and various other fiddle players, great fiddle players like Conor McAvoy, Dermot Burke and the likes, you've always tried to never be sort of overshadowed by the virtuosity of the fiddle, if you like, at the range of the fiddle is one of the most versatile instruments really there are. You've always sort of tried to match it and surpass it and go sort of toe to toe with what the might be happening on with the bow and the strings. Talk to me a little bit about that. I know it's technical, but sort of what would you
Yeah, well, I mean, like the players you mentioned, they're obviously wonderful players. So I mean, that's the motivation in itself, is when you're here, and I suppose, like I said, it's like I was saying about listening to fiddle players growing up, and that there are sounds you hear that you do want to replicate or attempt on the instrument, and actually sometimes they don't sound amazing playing solo, but they tie in nicely when you attempt them with the fiddle player in these cases. So I've always really enjoyed duet playing. I also like the back and forth between two players. I like, when it gets into bigger numbers, 3 or 4 or 5 people, obviously it becomes just one big sound. But I like playing with fiddle players, and like you said, kind of the fiddle players, the standard you mentioned there, who I never bought into the idea of just we all play the exact same notes, and just actually it's a bit more of a conversation, a back and forth and a push and a pull, and they do something, and it like you said, it challenges you, and you do something back, and you want to replicate the same sound. And I like that dynamic between two players. It's intimate and it's challenging, and it's if sparks can fly if you get it right.
Well, I tend to believe that it's the optimum duet in Irish music, fiddle pipes. That's obviously a subjective view, but I do. But it was interesting listening to Sean Keane talk about his relationship with Liam Flynn, where the pipes became and I haven't found that my own humble sort of life as a musician, that I would try to set this is the way I'm playing it. I can't. I'm not going up there, down there, and that Liam was very much his way was the way that they played it, and Sean, like being the master artist, worked around that and beautiful. With Matt it was more reciprocal. It was more would that be accurate enough to describe the way you would try to approach it? Something similar?
I think so. I mean, I think there's, not speaking for fiddle players, but there is, particularly with Sean and other fiddle players, there was a want or a desire to actually replicate the sound of the pipes on the fiddle. So that's probably as well, they were nearly happy to follow that sound, because artistically they wanted to try and create those sounds. It gave them an opportunity when playing with a piper to kind of tie in with the sound of the pipes. But yeah, I would feel it's a little bit more back and forth when I play. Like I was saying, even say tunes that go down below the low D register. I wouldn't generally play them because they don't sound great when you're playing solo. But there's an example of a situation where I enjoy doing that, because I'm never really going to play them as a solo player. So sit down and play with the fiddle player, and it gives me a chance to try those things and try that repertoire, because I don't know, I find you want to be constantly challenging yourself, constantly testing yourself. And I mean, these tunes are part of our tradition. They're there, give them a go, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. But playing with a fiddle player gives me the opportunity to play them and try and play them at a semi-decent level. That wasn't the tune I meant to go into, but anyway. I hadn't played that in years, but there you go.
Yeah.
That's part of the fun.
Used to play as well.
Yeah, I think it was in my head. Yeah,
I remember he played in Cloisterwood. There was something on it. It was in my old classroom.
All right, yeah.
And he stood up with his fiddle and his bow and said, "This is my brush, and this is my canvas."
Very good.
And he played. He turned it like
inside out.
Turned it inside out as he went through it.
Yeah, it's a nice tune. Yeah, it wasn't the one I meant, but anyway.
Talk to me a little bit about your father. Gay is one of the most significant people really in the history of fiddle and pipes.
Yeah.
There's no other way of describing him. Like what he's done is quite phenomenal as to resource the landscape for the instrument. And, but he's also a very, very good teacher because he learned from Rosam, who was a spectacular teacher, about the importance of learning properly. He gives some insight into the kind of environment you grew up in. And I look at a lot of the great players in traditional music, they came from very strong musical families where there was an encouragement. But to give us a sense of what Gay brought to you as a young person, what he would say to you.
Yeah, well, I suppose it's no more than yourself. It's a funny one because it's the environment we just grew up in. So in a way, having reeds and bits of pipes and piping going on all day, it was just what we thought was normal life. Do you know what I mean? And so obviously there was a kind of subconscious huge influence because there's just good music being played in the house the whole time. And he's very, very particular about the pipes and good instruments and them being in tune, like you said. And he would have been very much
playing the drones.
Exactly. Like I remember hardly being able to put on the set, and it was you've drones, play the drones, and when you get the regulator, you play the regulators, and it was kind of that attitude. And it's only when you kind of step outside of it when you get older and realise that there's many different approaches that you realise how important and significant it was, because you'd be sitting in the kitchen playing, and if it wasn't good or it was a bit ropey, you were told, and it was great for setting standard and for setting kind of musical taste. And of course we're so lucky with both himself and man that there was just good music being played literally in the house all the time. There's friends calling by, the CD collection, the tape collection was of the highest standards, so all of that kind of meshed together, just maybe created a kind of a perfect atmosphere and an ideal atmosphere to do well, I suppose, with the music. So, but yeah, just and also obviously access to instruments. So lucky, we have a few good sets of pipes in the house because of my dad, and the instruments that we got to play were always of the highest order, good reeds, making sure the instrument worked. If there was ever a leak, they'd be fixed and all that kind of stuff. So again, it's not until you're a bit older and you look back at it, you realise how all of this was very important in formulating and setting up a decent ability to play the instruments going forward.
How do you think the music community could be better served by the various organisations that work on its behalf?
Well, I mean, what yourselves and MPU and others are doing, they're very much becoming in focus and part of the community in the last few years, where it's about getting the community to buy into what the organisations are doing, as well as the other way around. I'd say, like myself coming in here today, all musicians in the community need to see why it's important that these things are done as well. And particularly with archive music, it's all just about access. It's just about getting people in and get people who are around playing today, just do you know what I'm saying is that it's not a separate thing to the community, that it actually that people buy into it, and you try and celebrate people, and rather than it's something that's just over there, and if you're not part of it, you don't know about it. That sometimes people are afraid of what they don't know of, and even I suppose with archival music and getting it online and getting people's access to it, and sometimes you just have to show them the ropes and show them exactly where to go for it and what to do. And it was very similar with the pipes. There was this idea that it was like a secret society, and we're pipers and we sit in the dark corners trying to tune our reeds, and you know what I mean. And actually, why it's in such a good place and it's thriving now is because it was just access, get people good instruments, get young people playing, get people to buy into it, and setting those standards, like you said, that it's funny. Standards are set in all art forms, and I don't think traditional music should be any different in either its music or anything else that goes on to do with it. Like you drive standards up, people come along with you, and we should have the best instruments. We should have the best teachers. We should have the best access to music, and I'd always be of the opinion that you don't take a step back from that, and don't ever apologise about it. We
celebrated Seán Keane this week, and the reason I keep returning to him is it's just such an interest in terms of the both professional career and his sort of private musical life.
Yeah.
The latter he valued ostensibly more, even though he recognised and acknowledged the importance of his career and how important it was from his, the life he enjoyed, and he enjoyed playing music either way. Things have changed in terms of the sort of professional landscape for music, and it's very interesting to hear Seán say that, but he had a 50-year phenomenal professional career, and which brought him all over the world, brought him worldwide recognition as an artist, and rightly so. Some of those opportunities may have diminished. Would you have ambitions that you'd like to see more opportunities for great traditional artists to perform at a higher level than, or as was the case possibly in the 70s and 80s, but somewhat diminished now?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, absolutely. It would be wonderful. I know more than yourself, and I am firmly believe that the melodies that we play are some of them are up there with the best of concertos that have been written. You know, they're interesting. The tunes, they're open to interpretation, variation, and there's probably an association with the music, obviously, because a lot of it is shared and played in pubs, that it's a pub music, and there's a kind of a grey area there between party music being associated with as traditional music. Do you know what I mean? And that's the idea. For some reason, the idea of it being on the stage, there has to be a different angle with it for it to end up on the stage at the moment. Generally, so I mean, obviously, yeah. I mean, I think opportunity should be there. I think when you get good players sit up there, like you were saying with Seán and Matt and these people, when they sit up there and they perform the melodies to the high standard that they do, it's as impressive as anything you're going to see. And I think audiences appreciate it, and they do. I particularly with the pipes as well. And Liam Flynn was wonderful like this. When Liam played, there was an aesthetic thing with Liam as well. You sitting and watching him and watching his work around the instrument. Even though he didn't move much or anything, he kind of had a stature when he played. And with the pipes, I actually think. I even notice people's reaction to when I play myself, that actually when they actually see the instrument and understand how the instrument works and what's going on with it, that's actually part of the fascination, and it's more of a whole performance when you see a full set of uilleann pipes in full flow, all in tune, and yeah, I mean, I obviously think it deserves to be on the stages. Yeah.
But Liam Flynn was a great ambassador, as we know, for the instrument, and you know, often his playing was described as more lyrical, or you know, and you know, that he had a certain approach, but nonetheless, you know, a phenomenal musician.
Yeah, wonderful.
Total control, but he for people who mightn't be quite as au fait with the pipes, how they work. And Liam, I interviewed Liam a long time ago, and for the people, we did it in the studio in ITMA. And he mentioned about there's no off on the pipes. You know, the idea that when you go to perform, it's full on from the start.
Yeah.
You know, that to people who mightn't be as aware, just describe that, what it's like when you actually.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's a very good way of putting it. Liam put it. There's no off. You know, when you sit up, and like there's quite a physical element to it. Like you'll always see pipers at themselves, something like, you know, something going on, and like you're tightening a strap on your arm. You're trying, even the instrument. I was chatting to Sean Keane's son Derek yesterday. He's doing a regulator class, and he was saying, I can't get to the regulators. You know, they're down there when I'm trying to play. You know what I mean? And I'm saying that you know, there is all of this type of thing. You have to get it up, and you have to get yourself set. And yeah, I mean, there's obviously it's quite physical. You know, it takes a lot of air. You're trying to keep the drones as strong, and they can waver if you're losing out on the air control a bit. And then obviously you're trying to play the regulators and do some interesting things and tempos and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I suppose what I was saying about enjoying music, where it feels like it's on a tightrope, this instrument is like the instrument that's like that. You always feel like you're just about a second away from falling apart somehow, and when you hit that last note, there's nearly a relief with it. So now obviously the instruments are getting better and maybe a bit easier to play in that, but yeah, I like that from Liam. There's no off. Once you go for it, you're in, and you're in full tilt, and yeah, you're just trying to control it and do something that might come across in some way interesting for your listener. You know?